Thief! Ole Kadam ole! The children among the crowd chanted, dancing in circles around the weeping boy. It was a busy afternoon at Iosa Market, just a day to Christmas. In the middle of this bustling chaos stood Nosa, a 10-year-old boy trembling with fear as a man held him tightly by the arm. Thief! Thief! The man shouted, shaking Nosa as if he were a rag doll. A crowd quickly formed around them, curious eyes and angry voices filling the air. Nosa's small frame was almost hidden among the sea of faces, but the guilt on his tear-streaked face was clear for all to see. A stout woman, the owner of the chicken Nosa had stolen, pushed her way through the crowd. Her wrapper was tied firmly around her waist, and her hands were akimbo as she stared at Nosa with fiery eyes. "Ah, so you're the one that has been stealing from me, eh? Today, God has caught you," she barked, grabbing the chicken from Nosa. Her voice was loud enough to make some traders pause their sales to watch the unfolding drama. The chicken in question was flapping its wings wildly in her hands. It was a big, healthy bird with feathers that glistened in the sunlight. She held it up like a trophy, turning to show the crowd. "See what this boy came to steal." "Imagine." Nosa sniffled, his lips quivering as tears streamed down his cheeks. He tried to explain, his voice barely a whisper. "I didn't mean to. My mama is hungry. We don't have food at home." But his words were drowned out by the angry voices around him. "Hungry? Does that mean you should steal?" one man shouted. "Where's his mother?" "She didn't teach him well," another woman added. "Carry him to the police station." The stout woman, however, had a different idea. Her eyes gleamed with anger as she handed the chicken to a nearby trader. "Bring rope," she commanded. In no time, someone produced a thin, rough rope. The woman tied the legs of the chicken and hung it around Nosa's neck like a pendant. The chicken flapped and squawked, its feathers brushing against Nosa's chin. The crowd roared with laughter, mocking him as they clapped and sang a mocking tune. "Ole! Ole Kadam ole!" The children among the crowd chanted, dancing in circles around the weeping boy. Nosa's head hung low, and his small body shook with sobs. The humiliation burned deeper than the tears rolling down his face. He wished he could disappear into the ground. He thought of his mother, her frail figure bent over their small cooking pot, struggling to feed him and his siblings. She had done her best, but life had been unfair since his father died. "Please, I didn't mean to steal," Nosa whispered again, but his voice was too weak to rise above the jeering crowd. "Bring tire." "Bring kerosene," another woman screamed, and in the twinkle of an eye, everything was assembled. Someone picked up a dry stick and tapped it on the ground. "Let's march him round the market first before sitting him down in the market square, so we can use the tire and kerosene style. That way he'll learn not to steal again." "Please forgive me," he mumbled under his breath, in tears. The crowd agreed eagerly, some clapping their hands, others shouting suggestions on how to make the punishment more severe. Nosa's heart sank. He could already imagine how the news would spread to his street by evening. Everyone in the neighborhood would know. As the crowd pushed him forward, his tears mixed with the dust rising from the market floor. Each step felt heavier than the last. His legs wobbled as people poked fun at him, some tugging at his torn shorts or pinching his ears. From a distance, an elderly woman in a faded wrapper watched quietly, her face a mixture of pity and concern. She muttered to herself, "This boy, there must be more to this than what we see." The crowd marched on, their voices growing louder, their laughter more piercing. Nosa's vision blurred with tears, and his heart pounded with fear and shame. He didn't know what awaited him at the end of the humiliation parade, but one thing was clear. This was a day he would never forget. The hot sun bore down mercilessly on Nosa as the crowd around him grew. The chicken, still squawking and flapping weakly against his chest, felt like a lead weight. The rope around his neck scratched his skin, and with every step, his small body trembled. People continued to jeer and point, their voices a sharp, painful chorus. "Thief! See how small he is, yet his hand is longer than his age," one man shouted, laughing as he clapped his hands. "Maybe he has been stealing for his lazy mother," another voice added cruelly, sending fresh waves of laughter rippling through the crowd. Nosa squeezed his eyes shut, his lips trembling. He wanted to shout, to tell them it wasn't true, that his mother was not lazy but a widow struggling to feed her children. She washed clothes for others and barely made enough to buy Gary, yet she always prayed every night, asking God to help them. But the words wouldn't come out. His voice was trapped behind the lump in his throat. A sharp push from behind jolted him forward. "Move, thief. Stop pretending to be tired," a woman scolded, her hand landing on his shoulder. Nosa stumbled but caught himself before falling. The humiliation stung more than any slap could. He glanced sideways and caught a glimpse of some boys from his school standing at the edge of the crowd, pointing and laughing. "Isn't that Nosa? So he's a thief. No wonder he always looks hungry in class," one of them said, grinning widely. Nosa's cheeks burned with shame. How would he ever face his classmates again? He knew his teacher, Mrs. Adabo, would hear of this. The thought of her disappointed face made him want to crawl into a hole and never come out. As the crowd dragged him further through the market, traders abandoned their stalls to join in. Some threw insults, others tossed empty sachets of pure water at him. A few even reached into their wares, pelting him with tomatoes and onions. "God punish your hand, you small thief," a fish seller yelled, hurling a dried fish at him. It hit his shoulder, and the crowd roared with laughter. The officer arrived, his potbelly leading the way. He wore a faded uniform and carried a long stick, which he tapped on the ground as he approached. "What is going on here?" he barked. His voice was gruff. The chicken seller wasted no time. "Oga security, this small thief stole my chicken. We caught him red-handed." The officer frowned, his small eyes narrowing as he looked at Noe. "You again, eh?" he muttered as if he recognized the boy. "What kind of trouble is this?" The old woman stepped forward. "Oga, let us not be too harsh. This boy is just a child, and he stole because he was hungry. Maybe we should." The chicken seller cut her off. "What nonsense. Hungry or not, he must face the consequences. If we leave him, others will do the same tomorrow." The officer sighed, scratching his bald head. He looked at Noe, who now stood trembling. His bare feet were dusty, and his small hands clenched tightly at his sides. "Let us take him to the market head," the officer finally said. "He will decide what to do with him." Market style or not, people picked up their tires and bottles of kerosene again. They proceeded to see the market head. The crowd murmured in agreement, and the chanting began again as they pushed Noe forward. His heart felt like it would burst from his chest as they made their way to the market head's office. Noe glanced over his shoulder. The old woman was still there, watching him with sad eyes. Her lips moved as if she were praying. For a brief moment, hope flickered in Noe's heart. Maybe someone would listen. Maybe someone would understand. But as the crowd's voices grew louder and the jeering continued, that hope began to fade. The market head stood tall, his stick planted firmly on the ground as the crowd continued to shout. Some demanded that Noe be punished, while others now pleaded for mercy. The young boy, tears streaming down his dusty face, looked helplessly at the angry faces surrounding him. Just then, the old woman stepped forward. She knelt down before the officer, her frail hands trembling. "Please, Oga, forgive this boy," she said, her voice breaking. Her knees pressed into the rough ground, and she held her hands up as if in prayer. The officer frowned, unsure what to say. "Mama, this boy is a thief. If we let him go, others will follow his example." The crowd muttered in agreement, but the old woman shook her head. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she pleaded. "He is just a child, hungry and desperate. If you punish him, what will that solve? Let me pay for the chicken, please." As she spoke, she reached into the hem of her wrapper, where a small knot was tied. With shaky fingers, she untied it and pulled out a few crumpled Naira notes. It wasn't much, but it was all she had. "Here," she said, holding the money up to the chicken seller. "Take this and let the boy go, please. It's Christmas season. Let us show mercy." The chicken seller hesitated, her lips pursed in anger. "This small money cannot even buy a full chicken," she snapped. But the old woman continued to beg. "Take it, my sister," she said softly. "This boy has learned his lesson. Don't let his Christmas be filled with pain." The crowd watched in silence as the chicken seller sighed heavily. Finally, she snatched the money from the old woman's hand and grumbled, "Fine, but next time he won't be so lucky." The old woman thanked her repeatedly, then stood up slowly, her knees aching. She turned to Inoue, who still had the chicken tied around his neck, and untied the rope. Gently holding his small hand firmly, she led him away from the crowd. "Let's go, my son," she said, her voice kind but firm. Inoue followed her quietly, his head bowed in shame. As they walked through the dusty streets, the woman began to ask him questions. "Why did you steal the chicken, my son? Where's your mother?" Inoue sniffled, wiping his face with the back of his hand. "My mama is at home," he said, his voice shaky. "She's a widow. My papa died last year, and we don't have money or anything for Christmas. My brother and sister have not eaten since yesterday. I only wanted to help." The old woman stopped walking and looked at him closely. His small frame, his tattered clothes, and the pain in his eyes spoke volumes. She sighed deeply and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You should have told someone instead of stealing," she said gently. "But I understand. Don't worry, my son, and God will provide."